name is Ari Redward. I am head of legal and government affairs at TRM Labs, the leading provider of cryptocurrency fraud detection and anti-money laundering software. Welcome to TRM Talks. TRM Talks is a monthly discussion with policymakers and business leaders in the cryptocurrency space. This month, I am joined by what I consider to be the cryptocurrency investigation and prosecution dream team. Thank you all for joining me today. They disrupted North Korea's cybercriminal hacking team Lazarus Group, took down the largest darknet marketplace for child exploitation, Welcome to Video, and seized millions of dollars in cryptocurrency headed to terrorist groups Hamas, al-Qaeda, and ISIS. That's right. Today, TRM talks with former AUSA Zia Faruqui, now a federal magistrate judge in the District Court for the District of Columbia, IRS-CI Special Agent Chris Janczewski, and AUSA for the District of Columbia, Jesse Brooks. So let's jump right on into it. I know folks on the line, I think probably more than anything else, really want to hear about the way you conduct your investigation from soup to nuts. We have a terrific group on the talk today from local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and even really law enforcement all over the globe, who I know have tuned in to hear about how this team really thinks about their investigations. So Chris, I'd love to start with you and really just start at the beginning and help us really deconstruct the way you work one of your cases. How do you start to think about your targets and identify your targets? And we'll go from there.
Yes, thank you. So I think one of the first things we kind of talk about is, one, does it kind of meet the mission? For IRS, it's generally going to be a financial case, and then me being in a cyber group is going to have a cyber component. Outside of that, we'll really just kind of see if we can make it be something that's impactful. And so one of the ways to help decide that is speaking with the AUSAs up front. So that would be Zia and or Jesse. And then also potentially our other partners from other agencies, and try and figure out like what can we have an impact on? Because as you know, being a former prosecutor yourself, is that these cases don't happen overnight. Like, it's a big investment. Once you get in, you want to be all in. You don't want to just be half in and get partial of the way through and then decide like maybe we should do something else that's more impactful. So I think that's the first step. And then really it's kind of just like figuring out kind of a plan of the people. And I know that like Zia and Jesse, myself, have always tried to prioritize working with people that are just equally as passionate and equally as hardworking to move these investigations along. I'm more happy to have somebody on our team that is passionate and wants to work hard, that maybe doesn't know what they're doing, versus somebody who might be an expert in the field, but kind of, not want to really like contribute to the team as much. I feel like people can always learn more, but you can't necessarily teach somebody how to work hard. I think you've probably been in your own situations in life where you have somebody, like, who doesn't love the guy at like a search warrant that it goes and does all the little incidental things of like, get coffee. He's there early. He's the last person to leave. You need boxes loaded in the truck. He's the first one with the hand up. Like, nobody ever doesn't want that person on the team. And, so I think it really starts from the foundation of the team. People that have been constants with us have been like Chris Wong from FBI Chicago, or Tom Tamsey from HSI, HSI Philadelphia. These people have shown that they have a passion. They want to move the case forward, and they're really kind of focused more on the mission than just like stats or something like that. Sometimes an agent gets involved and they're just looking at like, well, how does this benefit me and kind of our numbers matrix for our agency?
No, that's terrific. I appreciate that. I mean, I think one of the things that really separates, at least, I've been lucky enough to watch you do your work. What really separates your team is this ability to reach across the interagency. Obviously you're at IRS-CI, but you work very closely with HSI and FBI, and that's really not always the case. What is it about this team that really causes it to reach out and bring subject matter experts in from all over the government?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. This is Zia here. And I'll just start with caveat that I'm only speaking my personal capacity here. I was previously, as Ari said, an AUSA, and no longer one, but had the pleasure of working with everyone on this call on those matters. And so I'll only be talking about limited to the cases historically I worked on, nothing that's pending. But I can say one of those lessons I learned is actually from the person on the other end of this line, which is one Ari Redward. We know he was when you were a senior advisor at the Treasury Department, and your former time as a prosecutor. I think one of the things that made it such a successful enterprise was realizing that, when we had the Welcome to Video case, or the North Korea Lazarus cases is that, there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration. There's one of the things, certainly, I think Chris and I found so interesting when Welcome to Video was nominated for a public service award is someone said that there is someone in the government always somewhere who's a specialist on every area. It may be about particular type of turtle, or it might be about a very specific kind of cybercrime. And so being in the nation's capital, you have this opportunity where you could walk down the street and speak to someone at Treasury Department. You can go over to Commerce Department and meet with colleagues there. SEC and CFTC, we had a lot of crypto cases where we collaborated with them as well, and obviously FinCEN. And so, I think to Chris's point is that you want to find team players. It doesn't matter what formal roles they have. That's part of what made public service so exciting to me when I was in the government is that people are willing to work as long as it's mission oriented, and they may try something that's totally outside of something they're normally doing, but if they believe the mission is just, saving children, fighting terrorism, or prosecuting, North Korean proliferation schemes, they're going to find a way to plug in. And I think the DC Strike Force really leverages these interagency relationships to move cases ahead. You saw in the North Korea case that it was a joint action where Treasury was doing sanctions at the same time and unveiled while the indictment that IRS, DOJ, HSI had worked on, that really that magnifies the impact that you have. You show that the entire financial system is being shown that this is a really important national security issue. Justice is coming in, Treasury is coming in. We have other instances, where on the North Korea case, we also had cybercrime involved. And so the Department of Defense, and it just shows that the government is resolute in prosecuting these issues.
And if I could just jump in and add a little bit, there's also collaboration is only really possible if we're able to recognize what strengths different individuals have. And I think that from the start with the strike force, with all three people on the other line here, and as well as me, if you're able to recognize what people can do and then get out of their way a little bit, and then from there on, just look at it as a team effort, that's how you can really get stuff done. It's not about you getting the glory, but it's rather about helping people, helping victims, and having an impact.
No, that's great. Fantastic. Let me back up a second, sort of back to Chris on this. So you have your team, which, when you have a strike force or some sort of entity like that, you really always have in place as you move through the different cases. So you have your team, and let's say you've identified a target. Play sort of basketball coach for a second. How would you walk your team, or if you were sort of coaching a team of folks who are trying to do this work, walk us through those steps, the next steps.
The first part is get Michael Jordan, and you have him on the line here. So that's what you need to start with. So call Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing is really just kind of figuring out what the allegation is. I think in kind of street level crimes, you have a physical crime scene that kind of originates the crime. But from a cyber perspective, that's the internet. It's very broad. What exactly happened and what is our goal? So Welcome to Video, for example, here is this website that distributes child exploitation material. So there's the administrator side, that's one crime, but then you also have the clients, that's another crime as well. And those are two different kind of competing crime scenes. And so our focus was always on the administrator, but at the same time, we didn't want to turn a kind of blind eye to all the people that were purchasing the content from the website. So very early on, we kind of had it set that our mission was always going to be focused on the administrator, but we need to kind of keep these other things in mind and think about how can we approach this from a worldwide perspective. So, we brought in Tom Tamsey from HSI Colorado, and to Jesse's point about leveraging their best qualities, Tom is not going to sit down and look at Excel spreadsheets, but he's phenomenal at being able to get assets and undercovers in place around the world to be able to facilitate and move on that side. He's also phenomenal at getting help throughout HSI and their broad spectrum that focuses on child exploitation domestically and abroad. And, to Zia's point about leveraging each agency's assets, we have people overseas, but HSI had a much better relationship in Korea with the Korean police, where we believe the administrator was being held at. So obviously, Tom was a great person to add into our team very early on. And that was one of the first people Zia had thought about. And so I think once we kind of establish what it is we're trying to do, we then start kind of ping-ponging back ideas of how can we get there. And undercovers, that was one of the first things that we thought of. And then we started to look to see like what kind of data and stuff do we have internally as we start reaching out to get more information externally.
I think if Eric jump in and just maybe break down a little bit more kind of the nitty gritty of it is, in the cyber investigation, like Welcome to Video, the thing that's different about cybercrime that law enforcement has to think about is it's all about attribution, right? Normally in a regular crime, you don't know if a person's actually doing it. Here, people are not hiding. They're very open about it. In fact, they're selling drugs, they're selling weapons, they're selling child pornography as in Welcome to Video. So the difficult part is, who is this person, right? Who is, like in the Silk Road, who is Dread Pirate Roberts? That's the hardest part. And so what Chris and IRS-CI is so phenomenal at, and they're partners in law enforcement as well that we worked with, as Chris was talking about, is you actually then have to get down and start tracing the transactions, right? Like that is step one, is that you see a wallet address, and I think Jesse can give really good examples on the Hamas case. It got much more sophisticated, right? Criminals are evolving just as they see law enforcement actions. But in Welcome to Video, there was just a generator that would generate new wallet addresses for each individual person, so that, right, it wasn't all one bank account receiving the dirty money, like in a normal kind of traditional narcotics case, you would say, or a fraud case. Each person got their own individual account. And so Chris had to sit down there and use software to follow the path of the money and see, as he's looking, because of blockchain, everything is available. As he always uses an example, that software is so helpful because, you could do a bunch of math problems by hand, but you'll be there all day. A calculator lets you do it much more efficiently. Obviously, the tools that are out there on the marketplace are a lot more sophisticated than that. But I think his point is right, is that you first need to follow where the money is going and start seeing, like, wait a minute, I think this is the Welcome to Video address. And then you have to use, law enforcement tools to then attribution. So you send subpoenas to the different cryptocurrency exchanges around the world, not just necessarily the United States. Or, as Chris mentioned, Homeland Security had a lot of relationships with overseas exchanges where, they're asking them, maybe we can't subpoena them, but they'll say, but we can ask you for help. Will you be willing to help us on this? And I think one of the things that's really interesting about cryptocurrency is that unlike traditional fiat investigations, if a major international bank is robbed, no other international bank, the bank next door, Bank One is robbed, Bank of America, Wells Fargo is not going to have really stake in that. But when a cryptocurrency exchange is robbed, or if cryptocurrency exchanges are used to fund child pornography, we found that they all cared because they thought, there is this sort of community and that they feel like that they have a collective stake in the success of cryptocurrency, and that if cryptocurrency is being used to fund crime, it's going to hurt not only the brand, but actual value. And so those subpoenas then, Chris can speak much more intelligently than me, but I think, the evolution of how when you send those subpoenas to an exchange, back in, the beginning, a couple of years ago, they'd have no idea what it is, but now how they become nimble and answer those requests very quickly, and shows how important it is to have private partners who are willing to really move things forward. You get that data back then to Chris, and he's looking at what are the email accounts that are tied to these exchanges? What are the bank accounts? And then you're following up with subpoenas and search warrants to different providers as you try to build up the picture of who is this person, right? Who is orange jacket, bow tie one? Who is that well-dressed man? No one knows, right? Well, subpoena to the different exchanges, the banks, the email search warrants will get you into that content. So you can say, oh, that's Zia Faruqui, and then you build your criminal case. I think, the last thing I'll say, that I think Chris really and IRS does a great job of working with their law enforcement partners at FBI and HSI. They're sitting on a lot of seized data, right, from previous exchanges, previous investigations, and they leverage that as well to figure out who is somebody, with just a moniker and online screening. You don't know who they are.
No, that's really great. Sort of breaking that down a little bit, maybe best for Chris here. So how early are you using, blockchain analytics like TRM and sort of, some of the others in the space? How early in your investigation?
Yeah, right away. So, as there are various things that you can try and ask for data, whether it's a subpoena or a search warrant to get information externally. But when it comes, and as of course, each of those things take more time and more effort, but blockchain information is right there. It's readily available. So if you can look at that and determine as much as possible right from the beginning, you have a very good understanding of what potentially is happening. So again, back to the video as an example, very early on, we saw that when we saw the IP was leaking from the website and pointing to South Korea, but then also corroborating that was that we saw payments from the website were going to exchanges based in Korea. And so right away, we have a very strong indication that this administrator is based out of Korea for those two reasons alone. And that helps shape our team. It helps shape our perspective. And how much time did that take and how much reaching out externally for information? We may not have known who controlled those accounts at that time, but we knew that this is something we need to start laying a foundation for.
Following up there, so you welcome to video. You start to get a real sense that directs you towards South Korea. Using Lazarus Group as an example, what was it sort of early on there that had you start to be able to focus your case?
Yeah, so right away, they're kind of drastically different from just the kind of operational security to which the two cases were operating. So for the North Korean hacking cases, we saw there were just hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions that were very clearly to be automated, happening within minutes or seconds of each other, and these kind of convoluted peel chains that I've laid out in an affidavit. And that showed that there was a level of sophistication there that wasn't otherwise seen. And then some of the things were the IP addresses, of course, something that's always a focus in a cyber case. And it was always an IP address that was matching kind of their persona, the fake persona they were putting at exchanges or other places. And, that takes a lot of dedication. That takes a lot of sophistication to be able to consistently always try and pretend to be somebody else in some other place in the world. But as we point out in our affidavits, which I encourage your listeners to check out for more details, there were cracks. And what I would say to people when I explain kind of what we do, we are just looking for the one mess up. The bad guy has to be right 100% of the time. We just have to be right once to find out oh, there's the mess up. That's the needle in the haystack. Now we can focus the spotlight of the US government on that person and see that everything else now changes in the context of what we now know based on that one screw up. And it becomes very difficult to hide what you're doing once you have that kind of US government spotlight.
No, that's terrific. And it's interesting when I think about these tools, you have to think about them in conjunction with still great police work. And you're always figuring out some way to crack the case and sort of get in there, no matter sort of how powerful the tools you have are out there. One thing Chris said in the very beginning is sort of when to reach out to the prosecutor, Jesse. And I think you guys are a unique example because the prosecutors are involved very early in the process. But would you sort of describe what the prosecutor's role is on the team, and then maybe sort of the steps that you take when the case is ripe for you to really use some of your authorities?
Yeah, certainly. So, when you're working with Chris or the Michael Jordan and the Strike Force team, and you have all these assets, at your fingertips, you want to get in on the ground floor. You want to know what's going on. And that's particularly in the digital currency realm where things just move really, really fast. And you want to be able to get on the trail pretty early. And there's a lot of tools in the prosecutor's toolbox. Zia talked about a few of them: subpoenas, 2703D orders, which I can talk more about, search warrants, seizure warrants. But the most important thing, particularly in the cyber realm, is that there's no one size does not fit all, because you have to be nimble and you have to be flexible. And that's why trusting one another and trusting the work that other people are doing is always really important. And, an example of us being nimble and trying to change and use different law enforcement techniques and prosecutor tools speaks to the al-Qaeda Brigades case that we all worked on. So, in that case, the al-Qaeda Brigades, which is the military wing of Hamas, started on Twitter asking for Bitcoin donations from supporters. And it was a static address. Individuals were just sending Bitcoin to that static address. And for people that were tracking that on the blockchain, it's pretty easy to see who's sending it. It's just, one direction. But then you watch as the terrorists learn and they get more sophisticated, and they turned it in to a dynamic address. And then they moved it to a website where each individual that wanted to donate got to create a new address. And so you can just imagine how many addresses were created as each individual had to create a new one and send the money. And so as this happened, it spirals out and it's more and more tracking. And, if we and Chris and Zia had not been on the case really early, in order to be able to see this transition, it would have been much more difficult to get up to speed. And it just sort of goes to the fact that like understanding this cryptocurrency and understanding what's going on is really important for the DOJ at this point, because terrorists are learning. We watched it happen in this Al-Qaeda Brigades case, and the DOJ is similarly learning and discovering new techniques.
No, that's terrific. And, I always tell, anyone who will listen, you got to get your prosecutor in on your case early, and really start to use some of these tools. Jesse, maybe staying with you for a minute, and Zia, feel free to chime in. You guys have really revolutionized the way you use seizure warrants and other sort of civil tools in your criminal toolbox, if you will. Maybe talk a little bit about the way, for the prosecutors who are on the call, or even agents, local law enforcement in particular, sort of what sorts of things do you guys use maybe that aren't as conventional in a typical criminal investigation?
Sure, I'll start there. I started as a criminal prosecutor, and I still am, but I wouldn't have believed 2 years ago how many civil tools I would be using, but they're incredibly useful. And, seizure warrants can be used in so many different ways. I mean, we can give a few examples here. It can be from seizing a domain, like a website domain, which you can do a lot of things with, to seizing email accounts, to seizing bank accounts, to seizing cryptocurrency addresses and wallets. And on the cryptocurrency side, something that in these recent terror finance cases and in a few other the actions we've talked about, there's two different kinds of seizure warrants that you can use. And I think we're pretty novel with respect to how the DC office and our strike force team was able to go after them. So you can do seizure warrants to a virtual currency exchange to say like, hey, these wallets that are hosted at this exchange are involved in terrorism or involved in child pornography, whatever the crime is. And you need to give it over to the government because this seizure warrant and subsequent civil forfeiture order. But there's a lot of these addresses, particularly with individuals that are just sending one transaction or are sending money from a Bitcoin ATM, where it's not hosted. It's just a private wallet. So maybe we can't tell a virtual currency exchange, hey, seize this, but that address has been used for, let's say, terrorism. So what we'll do is we'll get seizure warrants for these unhosted wallets. Now, obviously, we can't actually get all the funds from those wallets, but it's, as Zia frequently says, and I've adopted, it's the stolen art model. At the end of the day, like if individuals know that these 20 addresses, these hundreds of addresses for some of our cases are involved with terrorism, they don't want to interact with them. They don't want to get in trouble either. So we're able to, in a way, make sure that those even unhosted addresses are not really usable anymore.
Name and shame, as Zia would say. Yet, I mean, all day, and it's really been extraordinary. I've been lucky enough to sort of watch you guys do what you do for a really long time. And Zia, maybe if you can talk about this, because you were doing this quite honestly, really before anyone else was thinking about seizure warrants and civil seizures, and subpoenaing Chinese banks and doing all kinds of things that really hadn't been done in this space before. Maybe talk a little bit about the genesis of all of this and sort of your journey, and as you've watched, bad guys adapt as well in the space.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I think, you're trying to find ways to put traditional law enforcement tools into the world of cryptocurrency. I think initially that created some challenges because getting to attribution, you don't know who the person who's committing a crime, and they may be overseas. And in that instance, those are two pretty big challenges. And so seizure warrants and civil forfeiture are tools that tackle that, because you're not necessarily going against a person, you're just going against the thing. And the burden is still on the government, right? The government still has to show that there's the illegality. They have to prove it, that evidence, either probable cause for a seizure warrant or by preponderance of evidence. But even though the burden is still on the government, there's just an opportunity. You can't do criminal financial disruption without a guilty conviction, but civil you can do by, you have the burden as the government, and then you have to go and prove to a judge that there was a crime, but you don't necessarily know who had that property because it may be unknown. I mean, so much is visible in the blockchain. It just naturally fed into it, is that, well, you could know this address is an illicit address. You don't know who controls it, and you just need to do something to stop it. I think this sort of boogeyman of unhosted wallets is, I think, part of the fear that people have related to that, it doesn't bear out because, there's unhosted wallets in real life as well. It's called cash, right? We can't track cash, but doesn't mean people said you should ban it. I think the same could be said for unhosted wallets. And so what the strike force when it was formed with partners at DOJ, like Alden Pelker at CSIPs, and people that have really spent a lot of time, Chris and Tigran at IRS, is, what are ways that we can try to get to, follow the money, right? At bottom, that's what financial investigations are. And that's what the IRS is, really so great at, is following the money. And so instead of trying to find this unknowable, faceless person, just follow the money. And frankly, that's much easier to do on blockchain because all of the records are there and they're available. And so I think that it was just an idea of, hey, civil forfeiture and money laundering investigations are what we do in a normal financial case. When we did Welcome to Video, we said, this certainly is a child exploitation case, but we ran it as a financial investigation. We followed the money. And that was, different than how typically child exploitation cases, were prosecuted, which, we looked to Ari because he was there at the beginning of the case for an expert on those type of cases. We're like asking, I remember talking to you, he's like, how do we do this? And you talked about, the terms and finding the child predators. And normally it's done by undercovers talking to them and trading, child pornography. But instead we had Chris using blockchain analytics and subpoena returns and search warrants to just follow the money. And then the money would back you into who the people were. And so, I think the idea of using these financial investigations it was just an idea. And then you had the proof of concept was Welcome to Video, and then the North Korea cases. And then Jesse, expanded that with, her leading the efforts against Hamas to not only seize hosted, unhosted wallets, but also seize the website and operate an undercover version of the site where people were still donating funds and things like that. She actually flipped on its head the whole, you don't know who's behind, right? Like, who's the person behind the computer? Well, it turned out it was Jessie and her team from HSI Philly, Joe Consavage, Ryan Landers, and Bill Capra. Those guys were the ones who are then the good guys who are running these things. And that's the beauty of crypto, is that you may not know that it's a bad guy, but you also don't know that it's a good guy on the other end.
No, that's exactly right. So industry is loving you right now for your defense of unhosted wallets. So that is terrific. So sticking with sort of that theme a little bit, Chris, we definitely have a lot of folks on the talk today from industry. What sorts of things would you ask of them as you are moving your way through an investigation? In my experience, I think most of the crypto industry out there wants to help, wants to do the right thing, does not want bad actors on their platforms or in their ecosystem. What sort of help could you get from industry early on?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. One, the crypto industry by far, in my opinion, leads the way in like response time and providing information, like almost in real time in some instances, in a couple of days. It's amazing to see still some banks like mail us a 2-inch thick stack of checks that are one check on a single sheet of paper that then I have to scan, and it's very voluminous and also costs a lot of money for each copy. Whereas industry is, providing these very detailed, thorough reports, and without them, these cases could not happen. And so I really appreciate when we reach out, we say, this is like a very fluid situation. Can you provide these records as soon as you can? And they turn around in like an hour, a day, or whatever. That's just like means a lot, and that's really helpful to help. So I appreciate that. And two, I think they've also sometimes it's all about the question, whether you're using a tool like TRM or something. Like it could be the best tool, but if you're not putting the question in to get the answer that you need out, it's kind of pointless, as I found out like many times in math class when I had a calculator thinking that would just automatically give me the correct answer. So like sometimes, if you have a subpoena, I'm asking for account A and I ask for it, and industry says, okay, here's account A. That's what you asked for. Meanwhile, on their side, they're seeing account A was also shared an IP address with this account. It also then did an internal transfer with this account. And that email on account A is also on another account. But they don't give me that information because that's not what I asked for. And I have no idea that I should have asked that question. Not that I want them to do my job for me, although I welcome it. But like stuff like that, when they can kind of have those back and forth conversations of like, okay, you're saying that this is potentially a terrorist. We're seeing it has all these connections. Potentially, if you send more subpoena, more legal process for these other things, or look at these pieces of information, that could really benefit you. And those things are just like monumental as far as how helpful they can be.
Terrific. So I can't let you guys escape without asking about the $1 billion Bitcoin seizure, the Silk Road seizure. DOJ worked obviously very closely with your team, Chris, at IRS-CI on that seizure. Congratulations, first of all. It's amazing. Really extraordinary and potentially a game changer in the space. I know at least Chris and Jesse cannot speak about a pending case, but what do you think these sorts of cases mean for your ability to keep doing this sort of work and building these sorts of cases?
I can go first. So I think it just speaks to the fact that there is a group of individuals at the DOJ, at IRS, at HSI, at FBI that are committed to this and are committed to using new tools and learning about the digital currency world. And, we see digital currency, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know we've had these conversations. We see digital currency as a tool of the future that the more that we can make sure that criminals can't use it or that they're deterred from using it, will be useful for, making sure that other people can use it. It's just like making sure that people feel safe in this world. And I think that the entire strike force and the individuals at all the different agencies are committed to that.
Yeah, I would say that that case was an example of just some of the tenacity that Special Agent Jeremy Haney had to just keep following up and moving forward on some of the accusations and the evidence that he had to try and track it down to the source. What's it been, 6 years or so since it took place? And I think that's just a testament to just how hard that government agents will work and try and get to a resolution in an investigation.
One thing that was so cool for me sort of watching it is, it's this nature of this new financial system where everything is open. And people were watching days before the funds move. And there was all this speculation out there about what was happening. And then we ultimately, a couple of days later, find that they were going to DOJ, which is sort of the irony of all ironies in some respect. But it really spoke to me about the changing nature of the financial system, that everyone is watching people's money flows as opposed to this silo system that we had before, or sort of is more typical banks, other financial institutions. I thought it was an extraordinary thing to watch.
I think, in the North Korea Lazarus case, it was incredible. After we released our initial forfeiture complaint, within about 48 hours less, we had an, situation. So, area over at Treasury, and the Treasury folks do the designation. That comes out and the DOJ complaint drops at the same time. You see these multiple addresses that had not been touched for over a year that had millions of dollars in them start getting flushed immediately. So it's not only, in that instance, the alleged criminals are seeing that as well. So they're watching it. You saw that there was conversations on a lot of, industry websites that said like, hey, these are addresses that were linked to ones in the complaint that looks like they're getting emptied out and they're going to exchanges who maybe don't do a lot of KYC. And then within about 55 hours or 60 hours, our team got together a amended forfeiture complaint and came back and then went to seize those additional funds. And so it's incredible to see that there's a crowdsourcing of, sort of people who are wearing the white hat and trying to feed information to the government. There are people who are reviewing it and kind of analyzing it. There's the folks on the, the criminal side also that then see this and try to, it motivates them. But it was clear. I mean, that case is demonstrated proof that when the government acts, if people then try to take illicit action response, you're going to get caught very quickly, which is just the, it is the paradox of cryptocurrency, is that it is so public, right? Like if someone was alleged to be a criminal and then went to their bank account and then took all the money out of ATMs, no one would know except for the bank. But because the paradox of cryptocurrency is it's actually way more visible, everyone can see it. It makes it much, much harder in that instance to dispose of assets that ended up then going to victims instead.
Absolutely. Chris, sort of finishing up here, if you were to give advice to either local, federal, law enforcement all over the globe, who might not be focused on making a giant cryptocurrency case that involves thousands of transactions or more, but has cryptocurrency in their case. In other words, there was a transaction to buy an advertisement on Backpage.com, or when that was a thing, I guess, or, a one or two transactions. How do you sort of suggest approaching for those guys who are doing that work on a day-to-day basis? Because I think we're going to see more and more of that. cryptocurrency involved in all of our cases. What kind of advice would you give those agents or investigators?
Yeah, I think you could look at it much like art. Like there are various levels of painters, right? You can have a paint by number, and then you can have Leonardo da Vinci on the other end of the spectrum. There's a lot of room to try and operate in each level in between those two kind of data points. And I think that there is an opportunity to have successful cases without necessarily being an expert in that area. I look at my kind of role as being like a general contractor. Like I have to go out to an expert, like somebody at TRM, and have this conversation, and then be able to relay that information back and, make it like a very layman example to then Zia and Jesse, not because they couldn't understand it more complex, but that's not their job. They need to be able to.
We can't understand it. Yes. No. At least I could never understand it. Yes.
Right. Like, so, speaking in that general contractor analogy, if I tell Zia, if we're going to move that wall, the ceiling's going to fall. I don't want Zia coming back and looking at blueprints and wasting all of his time. I want him to just trust me and believe that what I said is correct. And then he'll figure out the legal mechanism for how we're going to operate now, knowing that this is something we have to deal with. And so I would encourage people to reach out and find experts and or just other people that aren't experts, but are just willing to kind of like share what they know.
And I think, Ari, you're right that more and more we're going to see small amounts, at least, of cryptocurrency in a bunch of cases. And we're seeing it in all different types of cases. And so what I tell prosecutors is don't be afraid of it. See it as an asset. I mean, as Zia kept talking about, and we're all aware, a lot of this is open source. Like that's where you can start your investigation or at least lead your investigation. Don't just focus on the fiat currency, but instead look at the crypto because it could lend itself to a lot of leads. It doesn't have to be the whole focus of your case, but it can be really important.
It's an amazing point, and that is the very nature of the open ledger really allows for leads that we would never have if they were using some other sort of currency.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to look, other law enforcement officers, if you're state or local, look for an opportunity to partner with maybe a federal agent that has more kind of experience or resources. There's hope for you because I didn't really know all that much about crypto other than being self-taught. And I just kind of had this immersion being surrounded by people who knew before me, like Tigran and Aaron Bice and so forth, that it really, I could just kind of like learn through osmosis being around them. I think that's a big opportunity to look for.
Well, you guys are truly the very best. And it's a real honor for you to have joined me today for TRM Talks. This is the team that I always wanted to be able to sit down with and really, I think really more than anything else, help people who are starting to see cryptocurrency in their cases understand how these cases are approached by the very best. So thank you guys very, very much. And thank you so much to each of you for joining TRM Talks today. You heard really from the tip of the spear in the battle to keep our financial system safe from malicious actors. TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of cryptocurrency fraud detection and anti-money laundering software. Looking forward to another terrific discussion next month with the movers and shakers from the world of cryptocurrency. Until then, thank you all so much. And thank you specifically to all of those who work so hard every day to keep us safe.